The Vera Thomas Show. The Vera Thomas Show. The Vera Thomas Show. The Vera Thomas Show. Let's talk about it. 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 On the Vera.
Hello, hello, hello. I am so glad to see you here today. I am so excited about my guest. It's Dr. Tashina Reeder. And Dr. Reeder, how are you today? How are you doing? You're muted.
I'm muted.
Yes.
Great. Hi,
That's,
thanks for having me.
I am so honored to have you here. We're going to be talking about a lot of things, but before we do, let me just share with the audience a little bit about Dr. Tashina Reeder. Dr. Reeder is an author, an international speaker, elevation wellness coach, and the founder of Manifesting Her Academy. Known as the Transparent Educator, Dr. Reeder uses her clinical training as a licensed therapist and life experiences to lead women to embrace their healing journey to make shift happen. She published her first solo book, Manifesting Her: 7 Strategies to Redefine Your Identity After Trauma, Build Big Confidence, and Cultivate Self-Love. Dr. Reeder is a native of Philadelphia who earned her doctorate in couples and family therapy. She is a self-proclaimed life enthusiast who loves to travel, to experience different cultures and foods, listen to listen to me, rhythmic music, dance, and spend time on the beach to enjoy the sun, the blue waters, and the smell of crisp summer-like air. That is Dr. Tashina. I'm having a great time here, right? Dr. Tashina Reeder. Well, welcome, welcome, welcome. And
Thank
what I'm going to do, I am going to, let's see if we have any comments coming in yet. No, not yet. So, what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you a few minutes
Okay.
to kind of share with our audience a little more about you. I would like for you to kind of talk about your journey into becoming a therapist. What made you decide to become a therapist? So, I'm going to give you the floor and
Okay.
let you share.
Again, Vera, thank you so much for having me on your show to share about what it is that I do and my new book, Manifesting Her. And so, per your question, I am from Philadelphia. If you're a Philadelphian, especially female, we call ourselves, we're Philly Johns. We're born and raised here in Philadelphia. And I am an eldest child of one sibling. Went to high school, went to college. Actually, in school, I studied criminal justice in undergrad, and I actually had a desire initially early on to be an attorney. And then from going into school for criminal justice, that desire to be a lawyer changed to wanting to be a forensic therapist. And then I did an internship at Temple University for social work. where I worked at the state intensive aftercare program for high risk youth who were already in the system. And so I would go visit them in their detention centers. And it was at that point I realized these children didn't come here on their own. Something has happened to them, and I became more curious to know more about the family, or what happened in this child's life that brought them to um, to be adjudicated, to be in the detention center. And so it was at that point in social work I decided to study more about families, and wanting to work with the families, especially having to meet the parents of the children that I was providing um, um, probation service for. And I began to become really intrigued about the family system, which then led to me to pursue a doctorate in marriage and family therapy, where we studied intensively in relational theories, working with family systems and understanding those dynamics. And so from that point on, I began to provide services for not only families, but also couples and individuals. And I have a private practice that's based out here in Philadelphia on Sea Line Avenue. Um, at the moment, unfortunately, with the uptick in requests for services, I had to put a pause on my intake of seeing new consumers. But I have a passion um, to work with specifically women individually to really tap into their areas of pain, specifically trauma. And so while in practice, I decided to um, study and become more knowledgeable and receive more training in trauma, where I became a certified prolonged exposure therapy therapist and supervisor specializing in trauma treatment. It's a specific type of treatment for trauma. And there's different modalities that therapists use to treat trauma. And so as a therapist, as being human, right, we all have had some life experiences, and oftentimes our life experiences can in a way guide how what we choose, what we begin to grow an interest in. And for me, it was working with women who was suffering in silence, who've experienced a great deal of trauma. And with my own life experience, they say those who are social workers or therapists, or whomever is in the helping field, oftentimes we're also wounded healers, where we help because of our own experiences and desire to help others pull through their life challenges. And so that is all the things that has happened in my life in terms of schooling and my interest in becoming a therapist. That's how I arrived to this point of being a licensed therapist, I should say.
Yes, and that's significant. Licensed therapist. Now you talked about your work with juveniles that were in the system, and you became interested in delving more into what got them there. And
Yes.
so if you could just, I know you can't, if you can just kind of do an overview or an idea of some of the family dynamics
Mm-hmm.
that cause some of our youth to go awry.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's a loaded question, but
Very
working
late there.
and, but working with with youth and families myself, and understanding that a lot of parents are coming into parenting with their own unresolved issues, possibly and probably some of the trauma that you're talking about right now. So if you could just kind of shed some light
Mm-hmm.
to kind of give an indication of the kinds of family dynamics that cause our youth to move in a direction that is not favorable to them.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, unfortunately, there are many variables that can speak to why some of our youth end up in the system. And I believe most oftentimes what I would run into was some of these issues were intergenerational, where you have children who were born into intergenerational trauma. So you have addictions in the family, you have violence that's in the family, you live in a community that's violent, you experience violence. You have, unfortunately, we experience poverty and having a lack of things, and so you have youth wanting to have more because parents may not be able to afford to give you more, and so the streets teaches our youth different ways of coping that's not always healthy. And as they grow older, as you know, as teenagers, you begin to listen a lot to what your peers say, what's happening in the streets, in the schools, and oftentimes us as parents may not be always connected or have our ears to the ground, as they say. And so, and as parents, we're caught up in our own life trying to, pay those bills, take care of these kids, and all these other responsibilities that we have. And on top of that, you may be a single parent, whether a single father or a single mother. You having to maintain a home and a child or children, multiple children. And it's not always easy. And so when you have your child enter into that adolescent phase, they become strange to us. They look different. Like, well, who's this child?
Yes.
So, unfortunately, we have some children who find themselves hanging with the wrong crowds, getting involved in things, unfortunately, that can land them into trouble, like selling drugs, doing things that, out of thrill or excitement, and find themselves in trouble. Teen pregnancy, all types of things, and this is not to say that our children are misguided. I think this comes with this life experience, even as parents or older, we've had our own life experiences as well as teenagers, as adolescents, and they too are having their own experiences, and some of those experiences are not great, and some of them are amazing experiences that they're having. And so with the children that I began to work with, many of them were incarcerated because of drug dealing, selling drugs, or homicide, unfortunately, getting caught up in a wrong crowd, or being associated with the crime because of what someone else was doing. And so the probation department that I worked in was like the last stop for them. And many of them in this place were juveniles who were incarcerated for murder, or in the system for murder or attempted murder. And so it was a pretty disheartening thing when I realized what happened. This didn't just happen overnight. This is something that's been building up. They've been engaging in activities where what's happening at home was my first thought. And so, yeah, and I always tell parents, I get it, we're tired, and we have, we're pulled in many directions, different directions, especially if we have multiple children. And we depend a great deal on our older children, right? To help out, so to speak, right? Which causes them to be parentified in some shape or form. I'm not saying that it's necessarily a bad thing, as long as we are rewarding our children who are helping out, who are elders, with the younger ones. But sometimes they feel left out. They feel ignored or misunderstood, and they go seek attention elsewhere, whether it's in a negative way, or sometimes our kids become overachievers to get the acknowledgement, right? So it's important as parents, they talk about balance. Sometimes I'm thinking, I don't know if there's such thing called balance. Maybe it's just harmony. We got to find a harmony with what we're doing, because there's so much that we're dealing with now, especially after the pandemic. You have a lot of PTSD happening,
Yes.
depression, and our children having to be schooled at home, and now they're, the world is opened back up, and they like, yeah, I can see my friends and peers, and it's been different. It's been different lately these past 2 years, and so we're dealing with a great deal of trauma, really, trauma,
Yes.
and all types of mental health um, things that's being brought to the forefront, that's happening within our homes, abuse and child, all types of things that's been occurring since the pandemic. So it's a lot that our families are dealing with, and I'm glad that now people are being more open to going to therapy to get the
Yes.
help that they need.
Absolutely. And how long have you been practicing? Have you had your own practice?
So I've been practicing. I graduated master's in 2001. So in 2001, I've been practicing therapy, 2001 until now, still. So, about practice, I opened my private practice in 2013.
That's awesome. I'm so proud of you. That's so
Yeah,
awesome.
a long time ago. We go back years. So yeah, but I've scaled down a great deal. Where I am transitioning from, I still do therapy, but I'm embracing the coaching world. And what I'm finding is that, with I'm sure many therapists who may be watching may have experienced the uptick in therapy requests, and a lot of us as therapists are unable to take on all of the requests, which is a good problem to have, which tells us people are being more open to receiving the help. What I'm also finding is people who are also looking to do coaching, but they really need therapy. I'm like, yeah, coaching doesn't address this issue. This is really specific to a process oriented uh,
Yes.
service, which is therapy, versus practical here and now kind of steps to take, which would be coaching. And so
Yes.
I do both. And so, yeah.
Well, that's awesome. And now, what made you want to? Now, you talked about the children and working with the youth, but were there some other things that propelled you to want to specifically be a therapist? Was anything in your own personal life that you might have experienced that caused you to really look and say, I really need to focus on this?
Well, as I was maturing through school and getting my education, I was always one to help. I've always had a desire to help others. And then when I became more knowledgeable and experienced about therapy, I think that's really, especially with families, I think initially my heart was for the kids and wanted the parents to understand these babies and what they were saying, because everything wasn't their fault.
Right,
It was all
right.
scapegoat for what was happening within their family system. And so again, as I began to continue, I landed a job at a drug and alcohol program for women, where I was there for 11 years. And so I began to experience another world of a different side of the family system, or specifically with the women, the mothers, the wives, the sister, and then hearing all of what they were dealing with. And I was able to identify with it because I too am woman. I too have, I'm like, wow, I can relate, because we share something in common. And I believe my work there really um, shift me from doing family work to really focusing on women. And these women specifically were in recovery, had a lot of mental health. They were amazing women, resilient individuals. They were strong because they had to be, even though they didn't always feel strong. But they were open to receive the help, to learn how to build their confidence, how to live life again, because some of them were pretty depressed, pretty, insecure because of what they've experienced in life, and it's recovering from substances. It's not always an
Hmm.
easy thing to do. And so, and then my own, personal experience of trauma, I understood the shame. I understood hiding, suffering in silence. I understood um, the fear of judgment. I understood all of that. And when I went through my own, personal hell, I think that really motivated me. It put me on the other side. So while I did the therapy treating it, here I am on the other side needing my own therapy. I'm like, look at that. Who would have thought? And I always tell, people, I'll say, listen, it doesn't matter how educated you are or not. We all have our own challenges, and we all could benefit from receiving therapy. Now, I say this to my colleagues and peers. They laugh at me. I say, we need help too, but we just better at hiding it, because we have an image some of us are trying to uphold. And truth be told, we are too afraid of judgment, of what they may perceive us to be as. Well, you're a therapist, or you're a doctor, or you're this. How did you find yourself in that? Or why did you do that? Well, you're still human.
Absolutely. And sometimes even as a therapist, you're so close to your own personal issues that even with that training and with that background, sometimes you need someone else to look at you from a more objective perspective. You may well have the tools and everything that you need to heal thyself. However, again, being able to have someone else look at you from an objective perspective to maybe help you see through some of the things that you've experienced. And I
Yeah.
know we haven't talked about any of the traumas that you've experienced,
Mhm.
but do you talk about any of those things in your book?
Absolutely. So, as I was saying, the book is called Manifesting Her. And it's called Manifesting Her, the 7 strategies to redefine your identity after trauma, build big confidence, and cultivate self-love. And I thought this was, when I was writing this book, it's really my story in in combination to an interactive book where I'm challenging you to think about your own life experiences and areas in your life, because we all have areas in our lives that we would like to change, and we have areas in our lives that are painful because of some life experiences, and we don't know how to take those next steps to make shift happen, right? To make those changes
Yes,
in our
I
lives.
love that.
Right.
Shift
Shift.
happen. I
You
love
can
that.
tell people I'm not cussing, but whatever happens. And so I decided that not only was a book enough, but I wanted it to make an impact. So I also did a workbook to go with it, and it just really lays out. It's like it's a workbook, and it lays out questions you answer, and engages you, it encourages you, it inspires you. It's like a journal in some sort, so it's an extension of this book. And the book really just talks about my own story of pain from being in an emotionally abusive marriage. And I always specify emotional because many people assume that when you just say abuse that you were beaten,
Right.
and abuse comes in different forms. And,
Absolutely.
right. And so I believe that all abuse is impactful, and it can really cause damage to your sense of self,
Yes.
especially emotional abuse, because it really leaves scars on you mentally and emotionally, right? Your physical heals can heal, right? You won't see the scars, but them scars on your heart
Yes.
takes a whole nother turn in terms of how you see
Yes.
the world and yourself, right?
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
what trauma does. It really focuses
Yes.
how you see yourself, how you see others, how you make decisions. It causes you to feel indecisive at times,
Yes.
distrustful, a number of things. So I talk about what trauma is, kind of like just the basics of what trauma is. So I define it. I kind of give examples of what common reactions to trauma is, so that people can get an understanding of my walk, because many people may believe it. They never experienced trauma. I'm like, no, everybody's experienced some level of trauma.
Yes.
Right. Trauma is a normal response to a distressful experience, right? We've all experienced something that was shocking, that caused us to have to step back. And you may have felt the experience of that. They call it survival instincts. It's your fight, flight, or freeze. We felt an overwhelming amount of stress, and sometimes as a result, we may find ourselves in really a shock. You're in shock that this happened, and it may result in you becoming tearful, or at some point may feeling depressed or withdrawn. And some people may resort to substances or alcohol to cope with what they experience, depending on the trauma. And it's not always something that had to be really tragic, but something that was really disturbing to you, that caused you to have an overwhelming amount of stress, that was disturbing to you. That could have been something that happened at work. Could have been something like losing your home. All of a sudden you're like, well, now you're living in a shelter. That can be traumatic for people, right?
Absolutely.
You have natural disasters, people losing their homes, and sitting on top of the roof of your house is traumatic.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Different life experiences. And so I just talk about how I work through my trauma, and how I'm still healing. I tell people, just because I wrote about it doesn't mean your healing stops. Your healing is ongoing, because you're
It
still
is.
and you're still triggered different things. But the goal is to become more aware and in touch with yourself, that you're able to work through that. And so the steps that I created does just that: help show you what I have done and continue to do to work through my process to come here, because I didn't always look like this, or smile. It was I was in a completely different place several years ago. So yeah.
And you talked about the different types of abuse. And just for our audience, I'd like for us to just kind of share, because you talked about the emotional abuse, there's physical abuse, there's mental abuse. there's spiritual abuse, you know. So if you can just kind of, because we may have some people listening, and if not now, but in the replay, that need to understand that just because your spouse may not be calling you out of your name, that doesn't mean that you're not being abused in some other way. So if you could just kind of share the different types of abuse, and what are some of the signs and triggers that might help someone listening to understand, oh, I'm going through that and I need to do something about it. I need to call Dr. Reeder.
That's another loaded question, Paris. I'm gonna do my best. So
But you have the answers.
I'm gonna try my best. Because I don't know at all, but I will speak to this topic based on this my experience, but also just as a therapist, for those who experience abuse. And it's not always, you talk about domestic violence, intimate partner violence, they use those words interchangeably because there is abuse that have occurred. And so Vera had mentioned some types such as your emotional, your mental, your physical abuse, your spiritual abuse, but there's also financial abuse. There is sexual abuse that also happens. And so, abuse is definitely impactful. It's wrong. Wrong. What I mean by it's wrong is that no one deserves to be
Absolutely.
the victim of abuse, right? And
Absolutely.
oftentimes I find that in my practice, those who are the abusers were also abused,
Mm-hmm.
and they've learned these ways of coping, and some of them may not even realize that they are being abusive. And so then it's this kind of cycle that perpetuates itself through generations, right? We may become accustomed to uh, the yelling in the home and the fighting, and we normalize that. I'm like, that's actually unhealthy, right?
Very unhealthy. And
But
yes,
for many of us, we may have brought up in those types of household where alcoholism is there and prevalent, and we're used to seeing mommy or daddy intoxicated, and we normalize that. And then we in turn begin to pick up those habits or many different things, right? Or we may find ourselves entering into relationships as women and men with unhealthy partnerships because we don't know what healthy looks like, right?
absolutely. Yes. Yes. And awareness precedes change. And oftentimes, like you said, if you're living in a cycle where you see, this has happened to my mom, my grandma, and now it's happening to me, this is normal. So understanding that if we don't see anything differently or different, then we don't understand that, like you said, the yelling. I'm a big proponent of people understanding the true impact that yelling has on children. But I also suggest that parents think about how they feel when they've been yelled at and then amplify it in a child. And being a therapist, I know, and I know we're kind of off topic, but I think this is something that's important to talk about because yelling, people don't understand the impact that yelling has on a child. And as a therapist, I'm sure you can even touch more on the fact that it can cause depression, anxiety, it can cause the behavior to be even worse, and it can cause all kinds of physical problems, stomach aches, backaches, headaches, and so parents need to understand. And if you could kind of share some ways that one might be able to diffuse the yelling, and just kind of give a couple of pointers because that is so important. We feel that it's particularly in the Black community. A lot of times, yelling is just a way of life, and not understanding the impact that it has. So I know we got time. We got time. But I just want, if you could just kind of touch on that because it is an important issue. And we do understand there's several different types of yelling, but the kind of yelling we're talking about is the type of yelling when you're angry, you're frustrated, you're annoyed. So I'm giving you the floor.
I'll say this when I talk about yelling, I think there are different types of yelling that we may normalize or say, oh, we're a loud family. This is how we, how we talk, because that's how it's been normalized, because that's just how they interact. Folks interact. But then there's another, way of communicating, because yelling is really a form of communicating.
Yeah, it is.
And there are some of us who may not even be aware that we're yelling because we're used to, talking loud. There are some of us who feel like we have to yell to get our point across or to be heard, because for some folks, they may feel like if I don't, then my needs won't get met. So they may change their tone and elevate their voice. Then there's other folks who may, people yell for different reasons. May yell because this is a way of commanding respect or having control over the situation, so their voices become elevated. Now, I'm not saying so. Just like with children, and we have parents who yell at us because, especially, we're not listening. Your parents have raised their voice,
Yes.
and we start we listen.
Yes.
And so, I'm not saying that yelling per se is bad. However, if this is a consistent way of
Communicating.
communicating, it's unhealthy. Because every now
Yes.
and then you may yell out voice. I know I'm guilty of it. My 6-year-old, I'm like, hey, right? My
But
voice
you
is elevated, but it's not something I yell all the time, right?
right.
If you're yelling, you're always stern, but it causes fear, and it's a form. If yelling is like a form of intimidation, and that's when it's unhealthy and can be
Yes.
abuse, right?
Yes. Before you go on, I want to acknowledge Felicia. Hi, Felicia. Thank you for being here. She says, good evening, Queens. Yes, dysfunctional behaviors unfortunately can seem normal to those who deal with it daily in their everyday life. Absolutely, because until you know better, you're not going to do better. So she also says sometimes people feel yelling gets the attention they need to be heard. But I also think about the fact that a soft tone can, one, turn away wrath, but two, because yelling, and I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I never yelled at my son because I would be lying. But I did realize and I recognized when I started speaking in a more softer tone, but still firm, soft but firm, I
Mm-hmm.
was able to get more out of him by doing it that way rather than yelling. But like you said, it's something, and sometimes it just happens so quickly.
I mean, there's a lot of variables at play that, we can't all pinpoint down the reasons why. But what I do know is many of us, I know I wasn't taught how to communicate effectively when it's around your anger or your uncomfortable or your emotions. We weren't
Yes,
taught how to communicate. We watched our parents. We watched how
right.
they handle their business. We watched TV. So we learn from our environment. And so no one ever tells you until it becomes a problem for them. Like, you have anger issues. Well, I do. I don't know. I'm just. I've heard that. I've heard that. People say I don't have anger issues, but when they talk, they come real passionate about what they're saying, and it comes across as yelling.
Angry.
If the person don't know you, they may feel that you're being aggressive towards them because we were never taught really how to communicate in a way that people may feel that is non-threatening. Um, but I mean, everybody, people yell. Even the politicians, you watch them on TV.
Oh God,
They
yes.
keep yelling, and so it's
But
definitely a form of commanding control and having respect and getting your point across. But if it's all the time, then that can be definitely an issue.
absolutely. I had a teacher tell me once that she could tell the difference between a child that comes from a house where there's constant yelling and a child where it's not so much. You can actually see the difference. And studies have also shown that the way brain waves are different in children that are yelled at constantly and are not.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's an issue of concern
And it's
and
cool
learning.
that kids can, and adults can communicate. I mean, I've had families where I work with, and people who I know who are very calm, and they're very direct in their speaking. They're not yelling, and their kids practice the same way.
Yes,
Not,
children grow to be what they see. Absolutely. And
yeah.
one point I want to make, the way I think the way um, the new Supreme Court Justice, Miss Court Jackson, or Supreme Court Justice Jackson, the way that she handled the yelling at her, the disrespect of her, is a perfect example of how we can kind of diffuse, even though she didn't diffuse how these people were acting. But I mean, it was a shame.
That's
It
a
was
whole
terrible.
nother why she had to be that way. That's a whole nother topic of
Yeah, it is. It is. But she was so calm. And if we can learn to have that calmness in the midst of all the negativity that may be lashed at us,
yeah.
then it can help us to not possibly even be healthier ourselves, because we're not allowing how someone else is behaving towards us to impact us.
I
And
think one of the challenges too is sometimes as people we may take it personal, like a personal attack, when we shouldn't personalize um, what people are communicating, unless they're directing it towards you. Even still, listening, you know what's true and what's not. And so it's really about learning. I call it people management, but also your own emotional intelligence,
yes, yes.
your own responses.
Absolutely. And Felicia says, yes, soft and firm is a better approach. The receiver will not go immediately into defense mode. Both parties can work towards a resolution. Yes. And she said, great decision. So, yes, absolutely. All right. Now, let's get back. We're coming back to the book. But you had made some points that I thought were very relevant and needed to be discussed, because one of the purposes of us doing this is to help uplift, encourage, motivate, inspire, and educate the listening audience. And so those things that you brought up, I felt were things that we needed to kind of expound upon for a minute. But now we're going back to the book. So, can you, and I know we're not giving the store away, we're not giving the book, we're not trying to give everything that's in the book here tonight, but are there some pointers that are in the book that you can encourage our audience to possibly consider in in a scenario or in a situation?
Well, I'll say this. I'm going to be the cheerleader for therapy. I think that everybody should, invest in themselves in the form of receiving therapy. That's part of our well-being, nurturing, attending to our well-being by going to therapy to address the issues that we may recognize that we have. And so one of the steps that I do talk about as actually the first step of beginning that healing process is acknowledgement. We can't heal what we don't acknowledge.
Yes.
And oftentimes, I know that we may not have the words to acknowledge it, but start somewhere with the feeling, the emotions that you're feeling. Acknowledge that, right? And when you put a name to those emotions, that's the first step. But we have to acknowledge what we're feeling. We have to be specific about what that is, so we'll know what we are working on to resolve or to work towards healing. So acknowledgement can be difficult because it could be scary, because we're so used to, many of us, wearing that figurative mask that we wear to cover how we're feeling, because we don't want to be vulnerable. And the mask that we wear serves a purpose, right? Temporarily, because of the pain that we're feeling, and we don't want to be exposed to more harm. But after a while, what we're hiding behind that mask can become more problematic because we're not addressing it, meaning it will show up in your relationships. It will show up in how we talk to other people. It shows up in how we treat ourselves if we're not careful in addressing what that thing is that we're not addressing within ourselves. It could be insecurities. It can be a lack of confidence. It can be self-esteem issues around perhaps a disfigurement, perhaps an illness, perhaps something happened to you, such as a rape, or perhaps depression. A number of things that we deal with as individuals that sometimes being vulnerable is scary. We don't want to be vulnerable, so we try to deal with it ourselves. We wear our mask and we package it up in a cute little box somewhere within. But the moment something happens, that box acts like, remember them old school toys, that wind up toy, and it pops up and the puppet pops out. Our emotions do just that. They begin to bully us if we're don't deal with and acknowledge what this is to work through it. So we can gain control over the emotion versus the emotion controlling our behaviors and the way in which we're thinking about self and others.
Absolutely. Beautifully put. Absolutely. And at least Felicia says, great show. Yes, therapy is so needed in our community. It is. And people don't, they feel the stigma to go into therapy. And I'll tell you, when my son was 2 years old, I just knew this boy had a problem. I just knew he had a problem, and I went to therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing the therapist said was, "Well, tell me what's going on with you."
Mm-hmm.
And so I just started pouring out all the stuff that was going on. And she looked at me and said, "That's not your kid. It's not your child. He's just picking up on the stresses that you're feeling." So I want to touch on that for a minute, because a lot of times parents see our children as just going haywire without taking into consideration what they're going through and possibly transferring on to their children. And unless you're aware of that, and I had to learn that. I had to understand that he was just picking up on my stresses,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore the misbehavior was as a result of him feeling my discomfort and dis-ease. So can you kind of touch, and do you say anything about that in your book?
No, not that. No, not that. This is more specific to the individual and how to deal with their own um, process of healing. But
Okay.
to your example, yes, kids are pretty intuitive and they can sense when mommy and daddy or siblings aren't okay, when something's wrong. And so. For example, you never hear parents say, or teachers say to their parents, you have a very good child. They're very well mannered and they're very polite. And you're looking like, who, this one? Because at home, they're like, ah. Well, the kid typically is adapting to their environment at home. And their home is how we behave, but outside is a different kid. I always find it interesting when parents are like, really? Why you act that way at home? Or you'll find some family systems where that kid, especially the teenager or the budding teenager, like your 12-year-old, 11-year-old, um, parents feeling like they're not listening, they're being disrespectful, blah blah blah. I'm like, well, this is probably the hormones changing. They're growing into adolescence, and they're not the problem. I don't tell the parents that they're not the problem, but in my head, I'm thinking, yeah, they're more like this is kind of a scapegoat issue where there's something else happening within that family home, and 9 times out of 10, there's something else happening with that. And our kids who are more display more of the behavioral, I guess the behavioral issues that are brought to therapy as the problem, they're really just exhibiting the dysfunction that's happening within that family system. And so you'll find when you work with kids individually, in my opinion, you definitely have to at some point meet with those parents or that caregiver.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You cannot, I mean, because working with kids and trying to help build confidence and self esteem, but if they're going home to the stresses that are in that household, then as a therapist, as a counselor, as a coach, whatever you're imparting on those kids, it won't stick because of their family environment. And so being able to address the issues with both the parents and the children is so important. So important. Now,
Yeah.
okay, so tell me more about the book, because I have a couple other questions that I want to ask and talk about. But
What I'll do is I'll read you my table of content. So
okay,
there's 7 chapters. So the first chapter is my manifesting her story, where I really talk about my story to give you some context of the book. Then I go into chapter 2, me, myself, and I, the imposter. Many of us, I say in this chapter, are walking around, um, dealing with the drama and the trauma, and not really knowing who we really are. And so we're pretending. We show up one way, all happy, and you know, a different person, but different person in the front of others, but behind closed doors, we're someone else. And so we're like the imposter in public, but behind closed doors, we are just really suffering in silence. And so I go into the first strategy, which is acknowledge what I just shared about really identifying what that thing is for you that you need to deal with, that it's causing you some emotional discomfort or causing you to feel withdrawn or whatever that thing is. That's what needs to be acknowledged in order for healing to take place in that area of your life. And then my chapter 3 is bleeding from the inside out. Many of us are hurting. We've been through a lot of stuff in life, but we still show up. But while you're showing up, it's important to attend to that area in our lives that needs attending to, right? Like, how is your heart? What's your heart condition? Not literally like something wrong with your heart, but your heart's where you carry your emotion and your pain, and all of that stuff lies here. And so, how is your heart? Um, and then the second strategy is to unpack. After you have acknowledged, we have to begin to unpack some of this stuff. And unpacking is really scary because you have to be vulnerable and honest with yourself when you're starting to really delve into what the meaning of all of this things mean that you're acknowledging. And so I go through a lot of different, I don't want to give you all the goods of the book, but we go through the different 7 strategies to really help you delve in. And so I say in my preface, the introduction rather, that this book is not to be used to replace therapy, or to replace any recommendations you may have received by a professional, but you can use this in addition to what you're are being advised to do by your therapist, because this is really just it's an interactive book that is actually questions, and provide you some resources and nuggets of wisdom, for you to kind of sit back and think about, to really change your mindset, to make that shift happen. And you can take it back to therapy and say, hey, this book asked me this question and this came up for me. You can kind of process it with someone who you trust, a therapist, and things like that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And one of the other things I wanted to talk to you about, and when we work with companies and organizations, we always talk about leadership styles. Well, there are parental styles as well. And so being able to identify, which could also help in terms of awareness precedes change, but being able to identify those 4 different parental styles that impact on what you do, what we as parents may do, and how it impacts on our children.
Mm-hmm.
So, is there anything that you can kind of shed some light on with those styles?
So I can't recall all the styles off my head. I can recall the 2, which is authoritative and authoritarian. And
Yes. And the other 2 are permissible and neglectful.
there you have it.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so so they all vary, and I just believe that those parenting styles come from your own experiences of how you believe you should parent. Let's just be honest, parenting is not an easy thing. We
No,
always
it's not.
don't get a book that says this is how to parent your child. Each child is different. They have their own
Yes.
types and temperaments. But as a parent, you have to deal with them differently. You can't deal with the child the same way you deal with the others, because they are different humans. And so most times, some of us are mimicking what we learned from our parents, which could be that authoritarian style, very strict and rigid.
Yeah.
Or you have some parents who are very open to negotiation, hearing the child's voice. And you have people, and I've heard this from my elders, who'll say, "You're being too nice to that child. You need to tell." Well, wait a minute here. You need to do X, Y. That's how you parented. That was the way that mindset was in that generation.
Yes.
It's different now, so we have to be a little different with our parents. And really, I think what we are learning is kids are very witty and very savvy when it comes to technology and knowing a lot more than we knew at that age. And so we have to really approach them differently.
Yes.
Problems are a little unique. It may be some things that we are familiar to us as adults in terms of like uh, development, what's the word I'm looking for? Just our emotional development, peer pressure. No, we're familiar with all those things because with the words say there's nothing new under the sun. And so we do see things our kids go through like, yeah, been there, done that.
Yes.
They'll learn on their own. We want to save them all the time, depending on, the age, of course. And there's some things we can guide them. I think as parents, we have to be mindful not to, this is my opinion, but I always offer up the idea to consider how are we being overprotective, and if we are, what's really behind that? Because we're overprotective because of a fear we may have. Maybe that fear is tied into our own life experiences.
Yes.
If you lack boundaries with your children, allow them to have free reign. What is that about? Why is that important for you to allow that? Is it that you are maybe insecure in your parenting, or there is a feeling of not wanting to be strict, but why? Is
Right. And wanting to be their child's friend,
Yeah, there's a lot of things that's underneath the things that we do and decisions that we make as parents, and so it's hard to pinpoint one thing and say this is right or wrong. I think it's all our life experiences, and we are making sense of them as we parent along. And unfortunately, there's some folks who, unfortunately, as parents, cause harm uh, to their children that's unthinkable.
yes.
I always say that some of those folks too were also victims that never received the help that they needed,
Yes.
and never received it, unfortunately, and it transcended through generations with other children hurting children, and they're walking around with all of this pain. So
Yes.
it's really about being aware and learning and growing and acknowledging and not being afraid to have conversations in the family about
Yes.
difficult things.
Yes, absolutely. Now, how many children do you have?
I don't have any kids. I always speak in we because when I do therapy, I would just kind of say we to
Right.
help kind of garner the point. But I have
Right.
nephews who they're my babies. I call them my nephew sons. One is 6 and one that just turned 16. And
Okay.
they're two different people, even though they're brothers.
Yes.
Complete. That little one is. I think he's been. I mean, we probably said this about other kids. He's been here before.
Yes.
Very smart, very outgoing, very very smart. But all kids at that age are pretty smart.
Yeah, they are.
And I just have to tilt my head sometimes, like, where did this kid come from? How you
Yeah.
know
And
that?
out of the mouths of babes, I'm telling you.
The truth? You like,
Yes, I know. And so that's why parents don't shut your children up. Let them speak, let them talk. And you made a valid point. You said they're brothers, but they're as different as day and night. And so I'm sure their parents have learned that they have to
mhm,
discipline them differently. They have to communicate with them differently. They have to do different things with them to make their areas of strengths more prevalent. But
mhm,
so parents need to understand, and like you said, you cannot parent all your children the same way,
mhm.
and so understanding that. Now, and this is kind of off from your book again, but I want to ask you, you're probably thinking, why did she do this to me?
Oh my woman.
I'm sorry, but having you on the show and being able to give such a wealth of information, I want to take advantage of that while you're on my show. Okay, so don't be mad at me.
Okay, I'm gonna see you my invoice in a minute.
Well, I'm not getting therapy. You're giving it to our audience. Okay, so some of the other things
Mhm,
that you can encourage parents to do. I mean, because I'm telling you, like you said,
mhm,
there is so much going on right now in the world today that parents are stressed out, kids are stressed out. I mean, people are hurting.
mhm,
And so, if there's anything that you can share that might help a parent better understand what they need to do where their children are concerned, and how to differentiate the differences in how one may address behaviors.
Okay. So the one thing I do encourage parents and families to do in general, because we're living in a time where this has been different for us. You know, I mean, been through COVID almost 2 years, and we're still experiencing some of it as we speak. You know, with the mask mandate, all these changes we had to endure. I tell parents now that about creating tradition or routine or something that will allow for you to be transparent with your children, saying, "Hey, this is hard for me too. Yes, I was
Yes,
scared as well. Yes, that made me upset," and not feel that we can't show emotions to our children. I think it's important for children to see parents normalize what's going on, because sometimes kids may feel like, is it just me? I'm feeling a little disconnected, and parents say I feel disconnected too, because we went through a lot. Our kids are homeschooled for nearly 2 years, and they didn't have that social interaction that they were used to, and they probably were driving the parents crazy at home because they had all this energy, and parents were like, when is school opening back up? But to create a routine, something fun. I mean, YouTube, I call it YouTube University, has grown since the pandemic. You can do workouts, you can dance to videos. Parents are now doing reels with their children, or they're into social media, different memorable things to kind of build, if the young ones, that social interaction, the feeling of connection, some transparency. I believe is healing, and it's helpful for
yes,
to see that mommy or daddy struggles too,
yes,
and for your teenagers to really sit and talk to them. I think, teenagers can be so awkward. They get in that phase where I'm good. I'm like, what you
yeah,
say?
yes,
How was your day?
yes,
Good. Would you in
good,
school? I study. Parents be like, I need you to talk to me.
yes,
But I think with the older ones is a little bit more patience. And I think that's what happens when parents try to open them up to talk. They try to become friends with them, thinking that will be, and sometimes that can blur the boundaries of the parent child
yes,
relationship. And so it is, they be patient with them, acknowledge their feelings, acknowledge that, I noticed that you're not in a place to talk, but let's talk at this time, right? Do things creative with your teenagers. They're still children too. They're teenagers.
yes.
My nephew checked me one day. He said, "TT or Aunt Sheena." So the younger one called me TT. The big one called me Aunt Sheena. And I was like, well, "Y'all kids?" He's like, "No, I'm not a kid." I said, "Okay, you're 16." The 6-year-old said, "I'm not a kid either." I was like, "What you mean? You 6?"
So what did he say he was? I'm
He's
a
6.
little boy.
He's I'm 6. He didn't. He mentally didn't understand. And I was like, "Okay, so you're 6. Okay, you're not a kid, but you're 6. Okay." But I thought it
Okay.
was funny, but just laughing with them and acknowledging, more this, especially teenagers. I do with my nephew is, what's the latest dance? What music are you listening to? And oh, who's this? Because I don't know what they're talking about. To get a sense of what they're into, what he's into or she's into, he or she into, and um still not being the friend, but just showing interest in what
Yes,
they enjoy doing. Watch
exactly.
movies together or play games.
Yes,
To do.
exactly. Yeah,
How's your parents?
excellent, excellent, excellent. Absolutely. And there's a new show. It's called Come Dance With Me.
I had never heard of it.
Oh, let me tell you, this is a dance competition with children and their parents.
Hmm.
It is awesome. It's on CBS. It comes on at 8 o'clock on Fridays. I'm not usually here. I'm usually, but I'm telling you that, oh my God, the interaction and the engagement that these kids, and some are fathers with their daughters,
Mm-hmm.
fathers with their sons, mothers with their sons, mothers with their daughters. And I'm telling you, I think it is the best show that CBS could ever put on, because it's showing parents how to be more engaged in
Mm-hmm.
their children's lives. Whatever your kids are involved in, whatever they're interested in, get involved with it. Do something like, just like what Dr. Reeder is saying. Engage your children. do some things with them so that they feel that you are connected. They feel that you do care and that you are concerned. So, okay, that's my, I have to share that because I'm telling you that the more parents are engaged in their children's lives, the less these other issues we're going to find, like children being in detention centers and in the system. You know, if parents are more engaged, then that's going to lessen or decrease. I really believe that with all my heart. Okay,
Mhm.
we have run out of time, but I am going to give you the last word. Okay. So I'm going to put you on, and I just want you to share whatever it is you want to share. Now, you have a book signing coming up this weekend
It's Saturday.
and this Saturday.
Yes.
And the information is also streaming right now. You see book signing, and you can go to this website, sign up, or even go to the event itself. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to talk about that, and then we're going to have to go.
Cool. So yeah, I'm having a book signing. These are the books. So I have the regular book, Manifesting Her, and the workbook to go with it. The book signing is this Saturday. If you're in the Philadelphia area, feel free to join me. This Saturday, the shopping experience starts at 11:30, and then the program begins at 12:45. It'll be at the Embassy Suite Hotel near the airport off of Bartram Avenue, and I'm really excited. We have a violinist, we have dancers, we have it's being emceed by one of our TV personalities here in Philadelphia. We're having food and music, a DJ. Oh, I forgot his name, but we have a DJ that's going to be there. We're going to have a good time and fellowship as I kind of share about the book and also do a presentation there. So you're more than welcome. You can find the tickets at the manifestingherexperience.com at the Embassy Suite Hotel near the Philadelphia airport. So hope you can attend. And my email information is there as well. If you want to reach out to me, you can do that as well through my email. So thank you, Vera, for having
Oh man, thank you. If I was in Philly, I'd be there. I promise you. But I'm not. So anyone in the Philadelphia area, please come and support Dr. Reeder and what it is that she's doing. The book signing sounds awesome. It sounds so awesome. So thank you again for being here. And you will be back another time. So I'm just
Vera.
thank you so much. And I want to say to our listening audience, thank you for listening, and we will see you next week.
The Vera Thomas Show. The Vera Thomas Show. The Vera Thomas Show. The Vera Thomas Show. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. Let's talk